They called him a monster, a rabid beast guarding nothing but rusted metal and broken dreams. For 6 days, the old bulldog sat in the rain on top of that toolbox, refusing food, refusing water, refusing to move. His breath rattled like something dying, which he was. His teeth were broken yellow tombstones, his eyes clouded with age and pain. Every person who came within 10 feet got the same warning. A growl so deep it felt like the earth splitting open. The repo men wanted him gone. Animal control loaded their tranquilizer guns. The crowd whispered that he'd gone mad with grief, that he needed to be put down before someone got hurt. Even the dog's own family was ready to let him go. But there was one person who knew the truth. A 10-year-old boy who'd learned to read his father's eyes before the cancer took him, who remembered the last words his dad ever said, whispered with a dying man's urgency. "Lou knows where it is. Trust the dog." And standing in that crowd, smiling with perfect sympathy, offering comfort to the grieving widow, was the man who'd been waiting 6 months for this moment. The man who needed that dog dead and that toolbox empty before anyone looked too closely at what he'd done. This isn't a story about a loyal dog. This is a story about the price of promises, the cost of truth, and what happens when a dying animal becomes the only thing standing between a family and complete destruction. Because sometimes the monsters aren't the ones with teeth. The rain came down in sheets that October afternoon, turning the cracked asphalt of the Miller family garage into a mirror of gray sky and flashing red and blue lights. Detective Sarah Miller stood 20 feet back from the chain-link fence, her dead husband's jacket soaked through, watching the standoff that had been going on for 3 hours now. Lou hadn't moved an inch. The bulldog sat like a gargoyle on top of the battered red toolbox, his massive head lowered between his shoulders, his breath coming in wet, labored rattles that sounded like something breaking inside him. The dog was old, maybe 12, maybe older, with a face full of scars and clouded eyes that should have been half blind by now. But there was nothing blind about the way he tracked every person who came within 10 feet of that toolbox. A repo man named Martinez had been the first to try. He'd gotten close enough to reach for the handle before Lou's jowls peeled back to show teeth like broken yellow tombstones. Martinez still had his hand, but he'd lost his nerve. He sat in his truck now, windows up, engine running. Then came animal control. 2 officers with catch poles and tranquilizer guns, moving in from opposite sides like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Lou hadn't even stood up. He'd just shifted his weight, and something in that small movement made both officers stop dead. The sound that came out of him wasn't a bark. It was deeper than that, more ancient, like the growl of something that had been guarding the gates of hell since the world began, and wasn't about to stop now. Sarah watched the rain pool in the dents on the toolbox lid, watched it run down Lou's scarred face like tears. She knew that box. Mike had bought it at a yard sale when they were still dating, back when he was just a mechanic with big dreams and dirty fingernails. He'd painted it himself, that particular shade of red that was supposed to be lucky. The paint was peeling now, flaking away in rust-colored curls. Behind her, she heard footsteps splashing through puddles. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Paul. She could smell his cologne even in the rain, that expensive stuff he wore to cover up the fact that he'd never worked a day with his hands in his life. "Baby, this is getting ridiculous." His voice was smooth, concerned, the voice of a man who practiced caring in front of a mirror. The bank called again. "If we don't clear out this property by Friday, they're taking the house too. That dog is costing us everything." Sarah said nothing. She was watching Lou's ribcage expand and contract, counting the seconds between breaths. Too long, too labored. The dog was dying by inches, right there on top of that toolbox, and he knew it, and he didn't care. "He's been out here for 6 days," Paul continued, moving closer, putting his hand on her shoulder like he had the right. "No food, no water. He's suffering, Sarah. Mike wouldn't have wanted this." That was the thing that made her jaw clench. Paul talking about Mike like he'd known him, like he had any idea what Mike would have wanted. Paul, who'd shown up at Mike's funeral with his real estate agent's smile and his offers to help. Who'd been so patient, so understanding, waiting exactly 4 months before he suggested that maybe it was time for Sarah to start living again. A news van pulled up to the curb, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. This was going to be on television. Her husband's garage, her failure to control his dog, the whole mess of her life broadcast for strangers to dissect over dinner. Lou's head turned toward the van, tracking the movement with those clouded eyes. And for just a second, Sarah could have sworn she saw something in them that looked like disappointment. Not in the reporters, not in the crowd that was starting to gather. In her. The rain kept falling. Lou kept breathing, each breath a little shallower than the last. And somewhere across town, in Jefferson Elementary School, a 10-year-old boy named Leo Miller sat through his last period math class, his stomach twisted in knots, because nobody had told him yet that they were going to kill his father's dog today. But Lou knew. Somehow, sitting there in the rain with his body shutting down and his heart failing, Lou knew that boy was coming, and he would wait. He'd made a promise, and bulldogs don't know how to break promises. They only know how to die keeping them. The school bell rang at 3:15, but Leo was already gone. He'd slipped out during the fire drill, the one Mrs. Patterson called at 2:47, because she knew, everyone knew, and nobody had the heart to make him sit through social studies while his world ended. He ran the whole 8 blocks, his backpack bouncing against his spine, his lungs burning. Because somewhere between fractions and the Pledge of Allegiance, someone's mother had texted someone else's mother, and the news had spread through the classroom like wildfire. They were going to put Lou down. By the time Leo hit the corner of Gratiot and East Warren, he could see the crowd, the police cars, the animal control van with its wire mesh windows, and in the center of it all, through the chain-link fence, a shape that looked too small and too stubborn to still be breathing. Leo didn't slow down. He hit the police tape at a dead run, ducked under the arm of an officer who shouted something about authorized personnel, and kept going. His sneakers splashed through puddles that soaked through to his socks. The rain had turned to drizzle now, just enough to blur everything at the edges, make the whole scene look like something happening underwater. "Leo, stop!" That was his mother's voice, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. He saw the tranquilizer gun first. Officer Chen from Animal Control had it raised, the dart loaded, the safety off. The red dot of the laser sight trembled on Lou's shoulder, right behind the shoulder blade, right where the sedative would flood into his bloodstream and stop his heart in under 3 minutes. Leo threw himself forward. He collided with Lou hard enough to knock the breath out of both of them, his arms wrapping around that massive scarred neck, his face burying itself in wet fur that smelled like motor oil and rain. And something else. Something that reminded him of his father's work shirts. The laser dot danced across his back now, across his soaked jacket, and Chen lowered the gun with a curse. Lou went completely still. The growling stopped. The tension that had turned his body into coiled steel for 6 days evaporated in an instant. Leo felt it happen. Felt the dog's muscles unlock beneath his hands, felt the massive head turn and press against his chest with a gentleness that seemed impossible from something that had just terrified a dozen grown men. Lou's tongue was rough and warm against Leo's cheek, licking away tears the boy hadn't realized he was crying. But even as the dog softened, even as he leaned into Leo's embrace like he'd been waiting for this moment, for this permission to stop being a monster and just be tired, his body remained positioned over the toolbox. His hindquarters never shifted. His weight never left that rust-red lid. "Lou," Leo whispered into the wet fur. "It's okay. You can stop now. You can rest." The dog made a sound that wasn't quite a whimper, wasn't quite a growl. It was the sound of something breaking and holding together at the same time. "He won't move." Leo's voice was louder now, directed at the crowd, at his mother, at everyone. "He's not being mean. He's not crazy. Dad told him to guard it. Dad made him promise." Sarah pushed through the officers then, her face white, and dropped to her knees beside her son. She reached out slowly, and Lou allowed it, allowed her hand to rest on his head, though his eyes never stopped scanning the crowd, never stopped tracking threats. Chief Miller was there too, Mike's old friend from back when they were both young and stupid and thought they'd live forever. He crouched down, his knees popping, and looked into Lou's face for a long moment. What he saw there made him stand up and wave off animal control. "Nobody touches this dog," he said quietly. "Not yet." Because Chief Miller remembered Mike Miller's eyes on the day he'd deployed to Afghanistan. That same mixture of determination and fear, that same refusal to back down even when backing down was the smart thing to do. And he saw those exact same eyes staring back at him now from a bulldog's scarred face, still keeping watch, still holding the line, still waiting for orders that would never come. Paul appeared at the fence line exactly 7 minutes after Chief Miller's order, which was interesting timing for a man who claimed he'd been across town at a property showing. He came through the gate with his phone pressed to his ear, his expression arranged into something that was supposed to look like concern, but came across more like a realtor calculating square footage. "Sarah, thank God." He ended the call and moved toward her with his arms outstretched, but she was still on the ground with Leo and Lou. "I got here as fast as I could. Is everyone okay?" Leo looked up at him with the flat, assessing stare that children give to adults they're still trying to figure out. Lou didn't look at him at all, which was somehow worse. "We're fine," Sarah said, her voice stretched tight. "Lou's staying." Paul's smile flickered, just for a second, like a light bulb with a loose connection. Then it was back, bright and reassuring. He crouched down, his dress shoes squelching in the mud, and reached out toward the dog. "Hey there, old boy." Lou's head swiveled toward him with the slow, deliberate movement of a tank turret. The growl that came out of him was so low, it was more vibration than sound. Something you felt in your bones before you heard it. Paul pulled his hand back. "Still pretty worked up, huh?" The crowd was dispersing now, but a few reporters lingered. Paul seemed to notice them for the first time, and his whole body language shifted. He was performing now. "Listen, everyone." He stood up, addressing the cameras, the officers, the neighbors. "I know there are rumors about the property, about debt, but Mike was my friend. He trusted me to look after his family, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do." It was a beautiful speech. It was also complete garbage. "The truth is," Paul continued, his voice dropping to that confidential tone that made people lean in, "Mike had financial troubles before he died. Medical bills, experimental treatments. He took out loans, put up the house, the garage, everything. That toolbox Lou's been guarding? Mike told Sarah there was something valuable in it. But baby, we've been through his papers. There's nothing. And meanwhile, the foreclosure notice is coming, and that dog is out here slowly dying for no reason. The way he said it made it sound reasonable. Sarah's resolve was wavering. Leo could see it happening. "We need to move on," Paul said softly, just to Sarah now. "For Leo's sake. Mike's gone, and that dog is going the same way." Something happened then that nobody noticed except Leo. Paul's foot lashed out in a quick, casual movement and caught Lou in the ribs. Not hard enough to make the dog yelp. Just enough to hurt. Just enough to test. Lou's whole body tensed. His eyes locked onto Paul with an intensity that made the hair on the man's neck stand up. For 3 full seconds, they stared at each other. Then Lou looked away, dismissive as a judge passing sentence. That contempt, that absolute refusal to recognize him as a threat, was more insulting than any bite could have been. Paul's face flushed. "Sarah, we need to make some decisions. The vet I've been consulting thinks Lou might be suffering from rabies dementia. The aggression, the refusal to eat or drink. For everyone's safety, the humane thing might be to let him go peacefully." It was masterfully done. He'd made euthanasia sound like mercy instead of murder. Sarah was nodding slowly. She was exhausted, drowning in grief and debt. Paul was offering her a way out. "Mom, no." Leo's voice cracked. "Dad wouldn't want this." "Baby, your father was dying," Sarah said. "He wasn't thinking clearly." Paul's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something flickered across his face. "I need to make a call. But Sarah, please, think about what I said." Lou's breathing had gotten worse. His body was shutting down by degrees. He had hours, maybe less, and he was spending them keeping a promise to a dead man. Paul came back, smiling now. "I've got Dr. Morrison coming over. He's an old friend. He can examine Lou, and if he's suffering, we can let him go with dignity. Here, where Mike would have wanted it." It sounded so kind. And that was exactly what made Leo's stomach turn to ice. Dr. Morrison arrived in a white van with no markings, which should have been the first warning sign. Real veterinarians had their names painted on the side, had phone numbers and clinic hours listed. This van was blank as a lie, and it pulled up to the curb with the quiet efficiency of something that had done this kind of work before. The man who stepped out wore scrubs that were too clean, carried a medical bag that looked expensive and rarely used. He shook Paul's hand like they were old friends, which they probably were, and barely glanced at Sarah before turning his attention to Lou. "That's the animal?" Morrison's voice had the flat, professional tone of someone discussing a problem that needed solving, not a life that needed saving. 6 days without food or water, Paul said, his hand on Sarah's back now, guiding her, steering her. Aggressive behavior, refusal to move, signs of disorientation. We're worried about rabies. Morrison nodded, already opening his bag. Standard protocol for suspected rabies cases is immediate euthanasia. Can't risk exposure to the public, especially with children present. He glanced at Leo like the boy was evidence supporting his case. Leo's arms tightened around Lou's neck. The dog's body was trembling now, not from fear, but from exhaustion, from the simple act of keeping his failing heart beating for 1 more minute, 1 more hour. "I'll need everyone to step back," Morrison said, pulling out a syringe that caught the dying afternoon light. The liquid inside was pale blue, almost pretty. "This will be quick and painless, more merciful than letting him suffer." "No." Leo's voice was small but absolute. "Son, I know this is hard," Morrison said, and he probably thought he sounded kind. "But that dog is in pain. You can see it. Every breath hurts him. The kindest thing we can do is help him let go." It was a good argument. It might have even been partially true. Lou was dying. Anyone with eyes could see that. His muzzle was gray with age and pain, his body wasted down to muscle and bone and will. But there was a difference between dying and being killed. And Leo understood that difference in a way the adults seemed to have forgotten. Chief Miller stood off to the side, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He hadn't said a word since Morrison arrived, but his eyes tracked every movement the vet made, every glance Paul threw towards Sarah, every time Sarah's resolve wavered and reformed. "Sarah, baby, you need to let them do this." Paul's voice was gentle, but his hand on her shoulder was firm, keeping her in place. "I know it hurts. I know you want to believe there's some other way. But look at him. Really look at him. Mike wouldn't want Lou to suffer like this." And that was the line that broke her. Sarah's face crumpled, tears mixing with the rain that had started falling again. She nodded just once, and it was the smallest movement in the world, and also the biggest. Morrison moved forward with the syringe. Leo pressed his face into Lou's fur and felt the dog's heart hammering against his ribs. Too fast, too irregular. An engine misfiring on its last drops of fuel. "I'm sorry," the boy whispered. "I'm so sorry, Lou. I tried." The needle was inches away when Lou's body went rigid. Not with aggression this time, but with something else, something that made Morrison pause. The dog's head came up, his clouded eyes suddenly sharp, focused on something the humans couldn't see. His whole body shifted, and there was a sound, faint but distinct, like metal, scraping against metal. It came from inside the toolbox. Morrison pulled back slightly. "What was that?" "Nothing," Paul said too quickly. "The box is old, things settle. Come on, let's finish this." But Chief Miller was moving now, his cop instincts finally kicking in past his grief for his dead friend and his sympathy for the family left behind. "Hold on," he said, his voice carrying authority that made Morrison freeze. "What's in the toolbox?" "Tools," Paul said. "Just tools. We've been over this." "Then you won't mind if we check before we put down a dog who's been guarding it for 6 days straight." It wasn't a question. Paul's face went pale, then red. "This is ridiculous. You're going to delay a mercy killing because of some noise. That dog needs to be put down now before someone gets hurt." "Then 1 more minute won't matter," Chief Miller said flatly. He looked at Leo. "Son, you got a key to that box?" Leo's hand went to his pocket, pulled out the keychain his father had given him on his 9th birthday. A single brass key hung from it, worn smooth from years of use. Paul's eyes followed that key like it was a loaded gun. Leo's hand was shaking as he reached for the toolbox, but Lou shifted his weight just enough to let the boy's fingers find the lock. The key slid in with the smooth click of something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. That's when Morrison moved. He lunged forward with the syringe raised, and for a split second, everyone understood what was about to happen. He wasn't aiming for Lou anymore. He was aiming for Leo, trying to push the boy aside, trying to stop him from opening that box. Lou exploded upward. The old dog moved faster than anything dying had a right to move, his body launching off the toolbox with enough force to send it skidding sideways across the concrete. He hit Morrison's center mass, 60 pounds of rage and loyalty, and the syringe went flying, blue liquid spraying across the ground like spilled antifreeze. The toolbox crashed into the chain-link fence with a sound that rang out across the parking lot. Not the dull thud of metal hitting metal, but something else. Something hollow. Something that shouldn't have been there. Everyone froze. Lou stood over Morrison, who'd gone very still on the ground, his hands up, his face white. The dog's breath came in ragged gasps that sounded like tearing fabric, but his teeth were inches from the vet's throat, and nobody doubted he'd use them if Morrison moved wrong. "Call him off," Morrison whispered. "Please, call him off." But Leo wasn't listening. He was staring at the toolbox where it had come to rest against the fence, at the way the impact had loosened something, made it rattle in a way that tools didn't rattle. His father's voice echoed in his memory, from a day 6 months ago when Mike's hands had still been strong enough to hold a wrench. "The most important things are always under the grease, kiddo. That's where you hide what matters." Chief Miller picked up the toolbox, held it at eye level, and shook it gently. The sound that came from inside was wrong. Tools clanked, tools scraped, but they didn't echo like this. They didn't sound hollow. "Paul," Chief Miller said quietly, "why don't you tell me what's really in here?" Paul had backed up to his car, his hands in his pockets, his face a mask of forced confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about. It's just a toolbox. Sarah and I have been through it a dozen times." "Then you won't mind if we go through it one more time." Chief Miller set the box down and popped the latches. The lid swung open, and everyone leaned in to see. Wrenches, socket sets, screwdrivers crusted with old grease and rust. A collection of tools that any mechanic would recognize. Nothing special, nothing valuable. Sarah's shoulders slumped. Even Leo felt hope dying in his chest. But Lou was still growling, still standing over Morrison, and the dog's eyes weren't on the vet anymore. They were fixed on the toolbox, on something the humans were missing. Leo dropped to his knees beside the box. His hands moved through the tools, feeling the weight of each one the way his father had taught him. "A good mechanic knows his tools by touch," Mike used to say. "Knows when something's off, when something doesn't belong." Leo's fingers found the bottom of the box and pressed down. Solid. He pressed harder, and that's when he felt it. The slightest give, like there was space underneath where space shouldn't be. "Dad used to say the best hiding places are the ones you walk past every day," Leo said, his voice steady now. He grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the box and wedged it into the seam where the bottom met the sides. "Leo, stop," Paul said. And there was something new in his voice now. Not concern. Fear. "You're going to break it. That box was your father's. You shouldn't." The false bottom popped free. For a moment, nobody moved. They all stared at what lay beneath that thin sheet of metal, at the thing Mike Miller had died protecting, the thing Lou had been guarding for 6 days without food or water or rest. It wasn't money. It wasn't gold. It was something that would hurt Paul Reeves far worse than either of those things ever could. It was the truth. Leo lifted out the false bottom with trembling hands, and for a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The hidden compartment was there, just like his father had promised. But inside it, nestled in old shop rags, stained black with grease, was nothing but more tools. A set of Allen wrenches, 3 boxes of rivets, a coil of wire so crusted with oil it looked like a dead snake. The disappointment hit like a physical blow. Sarah made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, the sound of hope finally breaking. Chief Miller's face went carefully neutral, the way cops' faces do when they've just wasted everyone's time on a hunch that went nowhere. Paul's relief was palpable. He actually smiled, and it was real this time, bright and victorious. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I really am. I know you wanted to believe." He moved toward her, arms open, ready to comfort, ready to be the reasonable one who'd been right all along. But Leo was still on his knees, still staring into that compartment. Lou had dragged himself up from Morrison, leaving the fake vet curled on the ground, and now the dog stood beside the boy, his breathing like gravel shaking in a tin can. The old bulldog's paw came up, scratched at the bottom of the compartment with a desperation that tore at something in Leo's chest. Blood welled up under Lou's claws where the nails had cracked and split. The dog was dying right there in front of them, using the last drops of his strength to scratch at old metal and older grease. "Lou, stop," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Please, baby, stop. There's nothing there." But there was something in the way the dog moved, something in the angle of his paw, that made Leo look closer. His father had taught him to read tools, to understand the language of metal and mechanics. And he'd taught him something else, too. Something he'd said the last time they'd worked together in this garage. "The important stuff is always under the grease, kiddo. That's where you hide what matters. Because people see dirt and they stop looking." Leo's hands dove into the compartment, pushing aside the wire, the rivets, the Allen wrenches. His fingers found the bottom of the hidden space and pressed. Nothing. He pressed harder, moving across the surface, searching for that same give he'd felt before. There, in the back corner, where the grease was thickest, where nobody would think to check. His fingernail caught on something, a seam so fine it was almost invisible. He wedged the screwdriver into it and pried. Another false bottom. This one barely an inch deep, but it was there. Paul stopped smiling. Leo lifted it free, and this time, what lay beneath wasn't disappointing at all. A phone, the screen spiderwebbed with cracks, but still intact. Next to it, a stack of papers folded so many times they'd gone soft as fabric. And beneath those, a small envelope with Sarah's name written on it in Mike's handwriting. Chief Miller reached down and picked up the phone. The battery was at 2%, the screen barely glowing. "We need to see what's on this," he said. "Right now." "That's private property," Paul said, and his voice had lost all its smoothness. "You can't just—" "Shut up," Chief Miller said mildly. He pressed the power button. The phone unlocked without a password, which meant Mike had wanted someone to find it, had wanted it to be easy. The screen showed one video file, recorded 6 months ago, time-stamped 3 hours before Mike Miller died. Chief Miller hit play. Mike's face filled the small screen, gray and gaunt, propped up in a hospital bed with tubes running into his arms. His voice was weak, but his eyes were clear, focused, with the intensity of a man who knows he's almost out of time. "Sarah, if you're watching this, then Lou did his job. Good boy, Lou." Mike smiled, and it was the saddest thing Leo had ever seen. "I need you to listen carefully, baby. Paul Reeves is not who he says he is." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. The video continued. Mike's words spilled out in a rush, explaining how Paul had approached him 6 months before his death, offering to help with the medical bills, offering to invest in the garage. How the papers he'd signed weren't investments, but loans. Predatory loans with interest rates that would bankrupt them in a year. How Paul had forged documents, created debts that didn't exist, built a paper trail that would force Sarah to sell everything after Mike died. "I didn't leave you poor, Sarah. I left you proof." Mike's hand reached off screen and came back holding a thick folder. "Everything's in the toolbox. The real loan documents, the forgeries, Paul's real name and criminal record. I didn't put money in a bank because Paul would have found it. I hid it where only Lou would guard it, where only you and Leo would think to look." The screen went dark, battery dead. But it didn't matter. They'd all heard enough. Chief Miller unfolded the papers with careful hands, his eyes scanning lines of text that told a story uglier than anyone had imagined. Loan documents with Sarah's forged signature. bank statements showing money that had never existed. A background check on Paul Reeves, whose real name was Peter Raymond, wanted in 3 states for real estate fraud. Sarah's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the wet concrete, her face blank with shock. All those months of Paul's sympathy, his patience, his offers to help, all of it had been a con, a long game played on a dying man's widow. He was going to take everything, she whispered. The house, the garage, Leo's college fund. Everything Mike worked for. Paul was already moving, backing toward his car with his hands up like a man surrendering. But his eyes were calculating distances, measuring chances. Morrison had crawled to his feet and was edging toward the van. Neither of them making any sudden moves, but both clearly planning to run. "Don't even think about it," Chief Miller said, without looking up from the papers. 2 patrol cars that had been waiting at the corner rolled forward, blocking both vehicles. Officers stepped out, hands on their belts, and the trap that had been 6 months in the making finally closed. Paul's face went through a series of transformations. Shock, then anger, then something that might have been respect. "That son of a gun," he said. And he was talking about Mike now, about the man he'd thought was too sick and too trusting to see him coming. He knew. The whole time he knew. Mike Miller was a lot of things, Chief Miller said, folding the papers carefully and handing them to Officer Chen. Stupid wasn't one of them. Leo had stopped listening to the adults. He was on his knees next to Lou, his arms wrapped around the dog's neck, feeling the way each breath came slower than the last. The adrenaline that had kept Lou standing, that had given him the strength to attack Morrison, was draining away now. The old bulldog's legs were shaking, his eyes glazing over with exhaustion and pain. "You did it," Leo whispered into the scarred, grease-stained fur. "You kept your promise. You can rest now." But Lou's eyes stayed open, fixed on Sarah, waiting for something. His tail tried to wag and failed, managed only a small tremor that might have been the last bit of joy his body could produce. Sarah crawled over to them, her hands joining Leo's, both of them holding the dog who'd saved them. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I almost gave up. I almost let them win." Lou's tongue came out, rough and dry, and licked her hand once. Forgiveness, or maybe just love. Or maybe they were the same thing. Then his eyes shifted to Leo, and in them was something that looked like peace. The boy's face was safe. The woman's face was safe. The toolbox was open. The promise was kept. His work was done. Chief Miller knelt beside them, his hand resting on Lou's head. "Mike told me something once, back when we were young and thought we'd live forever. He said a dog's loyalty isn't about training or breeding. It's about promises. And a dog will keep a promise long after a man would have quit." Paul was being handcuffed now, read his rights in a monotone that couldn't quite hide the satisfaction in the officer's voice. Morrison was already in the back of a patrol car, his fake credentials spread across the hood like evidence of his own stupidity. The reporters were getting it all on camera, this whole beautiful disaster. And tomorrow the story would be everywhere. But none of that mattered to the 3 figures huddled in the rain around an old red toolbox. Sarah opened the envelope with her name on it. Inside was a cashier's check made out 6 months ago for an amount that made her gasp. Mike's life insurance, the policy he'd taken out years ago and never mentioned, paid in full before the cancer could make it worthless. Enough to save the house, save the garage, send Leo to any college he wanted. He knew he was dying, Chief Miller said quietly. But he made sure you'd be okay. Him and Lou both. Leo pressed his face into Lou's neck and felt the old dog's heartbeat, irregular now. skipping every third or fourth beat like an engine missing its timing. "Please don't go," he whispered. "Please, Lou. We need you." But Lou had stopped listening to needs. He'd spent 6 days listening to nothing but needs, denying his own body's desperate demands for food and water and rest, pushing past pain that would have killed a lesser creature. Now, with his family safe and his enemy caught and his promise fulfilled, Lou finally allowed himself to hear the one voice he'd been ignoring. The voice that said it was time to sleep. Paul broke. Not physically, not yet. But something inside him snapped when the officer's hand closed around his wrist with the handcuff. 6 months of careful planning, of patient manipulation, of playing the concerned boyfriend while dismantling a dead man's legacy piece by piece. And it was all coming apart because of a dog and a 10-year-old kid. "That phone is inadmissible," he snarled, his lawyer voice cutting through the rain. "You accessed private property without a warrant. Any halfway decent attorney will have this thrown out before—" He saw the envelope in Sarah's hands, saw her pull out the cashier's check, saw 6 months of work evaporate in the span of a heartbeat. Paul lunged. Not at Chief Miller, not at the officers. At Leo, at the boy who'd opened the box, at the weak link he could still exploit. He had some half-formed plan about hostages, about leverage, about turning this disaster into something he could still walk away from. His hand reached for Leo's collar, fingers grasping. He never made contact. Lou moved like something that had been saving its last bit of strength for exactly this moment. The old dog's body, ravaged by 6 days of starvation and a heart that should have quit hours ago, launched itself between Paul and the boy with a speed that seemed to bend the laws of physics. 60 pounds of Bulldog hit Paul's center mass like a wrecking ball. They went down together, Paul's back slamming into the concrete hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. Lou landed on top of him, and the dog's jaws, those jaws that had been gentle with Leo and patient with Sarah, finally opened and showed Paul what a real hellhound looked like when it stopped pretending to be tame. But Lou didn't bite. He could have. Every instinct in his body, every bit of breeding that went back hundreds of years to dogs that fought bulls in English pits, was screaming at him to close his jaws and never let go. But Mike had trained him better than that. Mike had taught him that protecting didn't always mean killing, that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was hold back. So Lou just held him there, his weight pressing down on Paul's chest, his breath hot and wet against the man's face, his teeth close enough that Paul could count them. The message was clear. Move and die. Stay still and live. Choose. Paul chose to panic. His fists came up, hammering into Lou's sides, his ribs, the places where age and starvation had made the old dog vulnerable. Each blow landed with a wet, meaty sound that made Sarah cry out. But Lou didn't move, didn't release, didn't even flinch. The dog's eyes stayed locked on Paul's, and in them was something that transcended rage. It was judgment. It was the accumulated weight of every promise Paul had broken, every person he'd hurt, every bit of trust he'd abused for profit. Lou had seen into this man's soul 6 months ago when Paul first showed up at the funeral, and he'd known. Dogs always know. Officers rushed in, dragging Paul out from under Lou, wrestling him to the ground properly this time. The handcuffs went on tight, biting into his wrists, and he was screaming now about police brutality, about witnesses, about lawsuits that would never materialize because everyone there had just watched him assault a child. Lou stood on trembling legs, his sides heaving, each breath a struggle that was quickly becoming a losing battle. Blood flecked his muzzle. But it wasn't Paul's blood. It was his own, coming up from lungs that were filling with fluid, from a heart that had pushed itself past every reasonable limit and was now demanding payment. Leo reached for him, but Chief Miller caught the boy's shoulder, held him back. "Give him a second, son. Let him finish." Because Lou wasn't done. Even dying, even with his vision tunneling and his legs buckling, he had one last thing to do. He turned away from Paul, from the man being shoved into a police car, from the threat that was finally neutralized. He turned to Sarah and Leo, and his tail, that stubby little tail that had barely moved in 6 days, tried one more time to wag. It managed 3 beats. 3 small movements that said, "I love you. I kept my promise. I did good." Then Lou's legs gave out, and he went down hard on his side, his body hitting the concrete with a sound that would haunt Leo's dreams for years. The old dog's eyes stayed open, stayed focused on the 2 people he'd been protecting, and his chest rose and fell in shallow gasps that were getting further and further apart. "No," Leo whispered, dropping to his knees beside Lou, his hands frantically searching for something to fix, something to heal. "No, no, no. You can't. Not now. Not after you won." But winning had never been the point. Keeping the promise was the point, and Lou had kept it. The real veterinarian arrived 12 minutes later, the one Chief Miller had called on a hunch when Morrison's credentials hadn't checked out. Dr. Patricia Wells had been treating animals in Detroit for 30 years, and she took one look at Lou and knew what everyone else was just starting to understand. They weren't going to save him. They were just going to let him go with dignity. She knelt beside the old bulldog in the rain, her hands moving over his body with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd said goodbye to too many good dogs. "His heart's failing," she said quietly. "Has been for days, probably. I can give him something for the pain, make it easier, but that's all I can do." "Do it," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Please, he shouldn't hurt anymore." Dr. Wells prepared the injection with steady hands. But before she could administer it, Leo spoke up. "Wait." He was crying now, tears mixing with rain on his face, but his voice was clear. "There's something else in the box. Mom, look." Sarah's hands were shaking as she reached into Lou's collar, the old leather strap that Paul had complained about, had called filthy and suggested replacing a dozen times. She'd never thought to look at it closely, had just assumed it was the same collar Mike had put on Lou years ago. But there was something sewn into the lining, something that crinkled like paper when she pressed it. She worked her fingers into the seam and pulled out a small plastic sleeve, the kind mechanics use to protect documents from grease and oil. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded tight, a life insurance beneficiary form, dated 2 weeks before Mike died. Made out to Sarah Miller for $350,000, with a sticky note attached in Mike's handwriting that just said, "For Leo's future, Lou knows where this is. Trust the dog." But there was more. Tucked behind the insurance form was a key, small and brass, with a number stamped on it. Safety Deposit Box 247, First National Bank, and a note, "College Fund. Started the day he was born. The bank lady knows you're coming." Sarah's sob was the sound of 6 months of grief and fear and barely holding on, finally finding a crack to escape through. Paul hadn't just been trying to steal her house. He'd been trying to steal her son's entire future, and he'd almost succeeded. Would have succeeded, if not for an old dog who refused to quit. "Lou," she whispered, pressing her face into his fur. "You beautiful, stubborn, perfect dog. You saved us. You saved everything." Lou's eyes had started to glaze over, the pain medication Dr. Wells had given him taking effect, pulling him down into a darkness that was soft and warm and free from the agony that had consumed him for days. But he heard Sarah's voice, heard the gratitude in it, and something in his failing mind recognized that the job was done The family was safe. The promise was kept. His tail moved one last time. Just once, a slow sweep across the wet concrete that left a small arc in the water pooling there. Leo had his arms around Lou's neck, whispering things only the dog could hear. "Thank you. I love you. I won't forget. I'll take care of Mom. I'll make Dad proud." All the promises a boy makes to the dog who saved his world. Lou's breathing slowed. Each exhale lasted longer than the one before, the spaces between them growing until the spaces were all there was. His eyes stayed open, fixed on Leo's face, and in them was something that looked like contentment. He'd been a good dog. He'd done his job. And now, finally, he could rest. The last breath left his body so gently that for a moment, no one was sure it had happened. There was no dramatic final moment, no Hollywood exit. Just an old bulldog, lying in the rain beside a red toolbox, his duty done, his vigil ended. Leo felt it the instant Lou's heart stopped, felt the absence of something he hadn't known he was feeling until it was gone. He pressed his face into Lou's fur and cried the way children cry when they lose something they can never get back. Chief Miller took off his hat. Dr. Wells closed Lou's eyes with gentle fingers. Sarah held her son and let him grieve. Because sometimes the only thing you can do for someone you love is sit with them in their pain and not try to fix it. The reporters had turned off their cameras. Even they understood that some moments were too sacred to broadcast. The rain kept falling, washing away the blood, the tears, the last traces of a standoff that would become legend in this neighborhood. Lou lay still, his body finally free from the pain and exhaustion that had driven him for 6 days. He looked smaller in death, just an old dog with scars and gray fur, and a collar that had held more secrets than anyone knew. But he'd kept his promise. And in the end, that was all that mattered. 6 months later, the garage on Gratiot Avenue had a new sign hanging over the bay doors. Hand-painted in that same lucky red Mike had always favored, it read, "Miller and Lou's," in letters that caught the morning sun and threw it back like a promise kept. Leo stood in the doorway with a wrench in one hand and a shop rag in the other, watching a bulldog puppy tumble across the oil-stained concrete. The pup was all wrinkles and enthusiasm, too young to understand why this place mattered, but old enough to know that the boy who fed him and played with him was someone worth following. "Come here, Rivet," Leo called. And the puppy bounded over with that particular gracelessness that only bulldogs possess. Leo knelt down and showed him the wrench, the same way his father had shown him years ago. "See this? You hold it gentle like this, not to chew, just to carry." Rivet's jaw closed around the handle with surprising care, his tail wagging so hard his whole back end shook. He looked up at Leo with eyes that were clearer and younger than Lou's had been, but carried that same fundamental bulldog stubbornness, that same refusal to quit once a job was accepted. Sarah appeared in the office doorway, wiping her hands on her coveralls. She'd learned to do the books herself after Paul's arrest, learned to run the business side of things that Mike had always handled. It turned out she was good at it, better than she'd thought. The garage was making money now, real money, enough that they'd paid off the house 3 months early. "Mrs. Chen is here for her oil change," she called. "And Leo, don't forget you've got that college fair after school. The University of Michigan rep specifically asked if you were coming." Leo nodded, but his attention had drifted to the wall behind his mother, where the old red toolbox hung in a place of honor. They'd cleaned it up, replaced the broken latch, but left the dents and scratches exactly as they were. Some things shouldn't be fixed. Some damage was holy. Inside that toolbox now were different tools, different secrets. Leo's acceptance letters to 3 different engineering programs, all offering full scholarships. The deed to the garage, with Sarah's name on it, and no, liens, no debts, no ghosts. And a collar, cracked and worn, that smelled faintly of motor oil and rain and the particular scent of a dog who'd loved them more than life. A customer's car pulled up outside, and Rivet's head came up, alert. He dropped the wrench and trotted to the bay door, taking up a position that was almost exactly where Lou used to sit, watching everyone who came and went with the solemn attention of a much older dog. Leo smiled. "Good boy," he said quietly. "You're learning." The University of Michigan rep would offer him a full ride that afternoon, with a stipend for living expenses and a work-study position in the engineering lab. Sarah would cry when he told her, happy tears this time, the kind that meant things were finally okay. Chief Miller would stop by that evening with a 6-pack and stories about Mike that made them laugh instead of hurt. But none of that had happened yet. Right now, it was just a September morning in Detroit, with sun slanting through the bay doors and the smell of coffee mixing with motor oil. Leo picked up the wrench Rivet had dropped and turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it, the balance, the way good tools fit your hand like they were made for you specifically. His father had taught him that, had taught him to read metal and understand engines and see the truth that lived under layers of grease and rust. But Lou had taught him something else, something deeper, about promises that outlast the body that made them, about loyalty that doesn't calculate odds or measure costs, about love that guards what it values even when guarding becomes dying. Leo looked up at the toolbox on the wall, at the faded red paint and the dents that told a story no one would ever fully know. He wasn't sad anymore, not the way he'd been that day in the rain. The grief was still there, would probably always be there in some form, but it had transformed into something else. Something that felt less like loss and more like fuel, like energy that could be converted into forward motion. "I'm going to make you proud," he said. And he was talking to both of them now, to the man in the picture on the office wall and the dog whose ashes were scattered in the small garden behind the garage. "Both of you, I promise." Rivet barked once, sharp and clear, and returned to his post by the door. Outside, Detroit was waking up. Another day in a city that had seen harder times and survived them, that knew something about rebuilding from wreckage and finding strength in scars. Inside Miller and Lou's, an engine turned over with a smooth, healthy rumble. Sarah laughed at something Mrs. Chen said. A radio played softly in the background, classic rock from an era when Mike had been young and invincible. And on the wall, in a place where the morning light hit it just right, the old red toolbox hung like a monument to the simple truth that love doesn't end when the heart stops beating. It just changes form, becomes something you carry forward instead of something you hold on to. The engine still runs, Leo thought, wiping oil from his hands. It always will. Because some promises don't have expiration dates. Some loyalties outlast death. And some dogs, even after they're gone, keep watching over the people they loved. Forever. Lou kept his promise when everyone else had given up. He guarded that toolbox with his last breath because that's what loyalty looks like when it's real, when it costs everything. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever known a dog like Lou? One who loved you more than they loved their own life? Maybe it was a bulldog, maybe a mutt from the shelter, maybe just a friend who happened to have 4 legs and a heart bigger than the world. Drop their name in the comments below. Tell me their story. Because dogs like Lou deserve to be remembered, and the people who love them deserve to know they're not alone in missing them. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you lost or someone you're grateful to still have, hit that subscribe button. Because every week, I bring you stories like this. Real stories about loyalty, love, and the quiet heroes who never asked for anything except to be loved back. Lou's gone now, but his story lives on every time someone like you shares it, remembers it, and honors what he stood for. So tell me, who was your Lou? I'll be reading every comment, and I'll see you in the next story.